Ladies and gentlemen, ghouls and ghosts, this is That Film Channel. I'm your host, Matthew Walters, and welcome to Matthew's Monster Mash. Now, I am ill as fuck at the time of recording this video, so I apologise if I sound a bit congested, but in this video we'll be quickly exploring the birth of horror history, going through the most iconic moments of the silent age. This is the first part of a 4-part series I'm wanting to do, going through the different eras of horror history. Join me as we go back to the past to see what it was all about. Let's begin, shall we? Jesus Christ. If we were being technical, the first ever horror film can be dated back to 1896 with George Méliès' The Devil's Castle, which is about 3 minutes long. Then there's examples such as Thomas Edison's 1910 production of Frankenstein, which uses simple but effective techniques which were, I imagine, quite shocking for the time. Unfortunately, it's estimated that around 80% of all silent films are lost due to the lack of film preservation at the time. At this point in history, film was seen less of an art and more of a theatrical stage play. Once people stopped going to see it, it would be quickly shelved and disposed of without any real consideration for its physical state or its archival value. Film at the time was composed of nitrate, which is highly combustible, and resulted in many warehouses of films going up in flames. It's a real tragedy that so many productions full of talent and dedicated pioneers of early cinema will be lost forever. Some films, such as Lon Chaney's London After Midnight, were mass-produced and distributed, meaning that the script and many production stills still survive, and there's a good chance that there may be a copy surviving out there. The last known copy being destroyed in a fire at the MGM vault in 1967. Other films, however, would not be so fortunate, and we'll never know how many gems and potential classics are gone forever. Liquid energy. To keep it relatively simple, we'll only discuss feature-length films and what are, in my opinion, the most influential and iconic films of the era. This brings us to 1920's The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari by Robert Weiner. This surreal piece of German expressionism paved the way for future horror cinema and directly inspired many filmmakers of several generations, and for good reason. Just look at anything by Tim Burton and it's not hard to see where his influences lie. The warped, unnatural, dreamlike sets, its painted-on use of chiaroscuro, its expressionistic style of acting. German film professor Anton Keyes wrote, "The style of German expressionism allowed the filmmakers to experiment with filmic technology and special effects, and to explore the twisted realm of repressed desires, unconscious fears, and deranged fixations." Fresh off the First World War, it's no surprise that this film became a result of that fixation. With this film in particular, the style lends itself to the actual plot. Spoilers for a 101-year-old film, a man committed to a mental institution tells the story of a series of murders committed by Caligari, the film's antagonist, using his somnambulist Caesar until the creature falls in love with the protagonist's fiancée. This is one of the earliest examples of a classic trope in horror history, being the monster falling in love with the girl he has no business being with. It's revealed that Caligari actually runs the insane asylum, and the protagonist finds himself committed, where we can also see Caesar and his supposed fiancée occupying. What's interesting is that through its unique visual style, it becomes apparent that these are fantasies of a madman, and we have been viewing this world through his warped perspective. I can imagine this twist shocking audiences of a century past. Though it may be a device that we are all too familiar with today, it originated with Caligari. F.W. Murnau's Nosferatu is cemented in horror history as the first adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula. However, at the time, Bram Stoker's widow was still alive, and therefore they did not have the rights to actually make the film. As it's documented, all copies, including the original 35mm negative, were ordered to be destroyed. We are very lucky that a copy survived, and that we can still see the film in relatively high quality today. It would be Prana Films' one and only released picture, as they declared bankruptcy to try and avoid the copyright infringement charges. The film itself is all shot on location, which was practically unheard of at the time, not least considering its relatively low budget. Compared with Caligari, it has a much more naturalistic feel right down to the acting, with the exception of Count Orlok, who embodies his expressionistic performance in one of the most iconic portrayals in cinematic history. So much so that due to the lack of information on Max Schreck, the actor underneath the costume, some speculated that he was either a different actor working under a pseudonym or the real deal, a vampire. Look no further than 2000's Shadow of a Vampire, which details the production of Nosferatu, with Willem Dafoe playing a real-life vampire Murnau hires for the film in exchange for blood. As a side note, Schreck did go on to be in other Murnau productions and acted well into the 1930s. One thing you might notice is that unlike most other adaptations of Dracula, the design for the vampire is quite ugly and rodent-like, whereas the future interpretations would mostly be sleek and suave, with a few exceptions, and it keeps within the original novel. This and the plague that Orlok brings with him as he arrives in Wisborg may have had anti-Semitic undertones, as it lends to stereotypical caricatures of Jewish people at the time, playing to the fears and anxieties of the German public. Nevertheless, this is only speculation, and Murnau was very friendly with a number of Jewish men and women, including the actor who plays Nock within the film. Murnau himself was a homosexual, and probably would have been much more sympathetic than most to a persecuted group within German society. So I find it unlikely that this interpretation was at all intentional. Part documentary, part dramatised narrative sequences, Benjamin Christiansen's controversial Haxan is a Swedish film shot in Denmark. The film explores the historical roots and superstitions surrounding witchcraft through the Middle Ages to the modern day. Well, 20th century modern day. The film was the most expensive Scandinavian silent picture ever made, around 2 million kroner. Although it received some positive reception in Sweden and Denmark at the time, censors in countries such as Germany, France and the United States seriously objected to the graphic depictions of torture, nudity and sexual perversion. Imagine if they'd seen a Serbian film. The film uses puppetry and stop-motion animation techniques in its portrayal of the occult, among other effects such as superimposition and reversal footage, which are gorgeous to look at. There are so many films I would love to talk about within this genre for their cultural and historical significance, but I'll end today's video by discussing the man with 1,000 faces, Lon Chaney. Chaney had a legendary career in film. Known for applying his own groundbreaking makeup in many films, he was a true auteur of cinema. He was the original Hunchback of Notre Dame, and arguably best known as the Phantom in 1925's Phantom of the Opera. Many of his films are now unfortunately lost, such as the aforementioned London After Midnight, which is considered to be the holy grail of lost films, and it displays Chaney as the first ever American vampire on film. It was also Todd Browning and Lon Chaney's most successful collaboration together. Unfortunately, Chaney would die of throat cancer in 1930, after making his one and only talkie film debut, poetically and ironically passing with the silent era. Thank you for making it to the end of this video. Hopefully I can get the other parts of this series out before the end of October, but I do have a lot of other projects going on, and that's without taking into account my job and university. So it's very likely this 4-part series will run into November. I would love to go into further depth on each of these films, either as separate videos or as part of a bigger documentary. Think of this almost like a test run. So let me know if you're interested in these kinds of videos for more in the future. I certainly plan to make similar styles of video on all things cinema, about any topic, after Spooktober has ended, so stay tuned. I'm currently working on a video detailing the history of the Tyneside cinema, which is a cinema very close to my heart, and my first experience seeing something actually screened on 35mm. So hopefully that'll be out shortly. In addition, I've also got a short film in the works called The Suitcase, which is almost wrapped filming, so definitely watch out for that. And with that, I'm your host Matthew Walters, and thank you for watching.